welcome to Decision Point. Today we ask the question, are we as a nation safer but sorry? Has our level of freedom declined since 9/11? In an effort to protect ourselves, are we on a perilous course as a nation? My guests today are Dr. Timothy Roth, who is the department chair and professor of economics at University of Texas, El Paso, and Rashish Tahiliani, who is also a lecturer for the School of Business Administration at UTEP. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Now, Dr. Roth, you have been associated with the seat of power in the past, in that you were an advisor to President Reagan, you were an advisor to Congress, and you have been very involved and connected with Washington, D.C. How did the whole 9/11 tragedy strike you at the time?
Very simple. I don't think I was any different than any other American.
Mm-hmm.
I regarded this as a threat to the survival, in every sense of the word, of our self-governing republic.
Mm-hmm.
And I will suggest to you, in anticipation perhaps of some questions that you're likely to ask, I adopted the view when it happened that rights are not immutable, that in the interest of national defense, and that's what this was really about. This is really about national defense. We are under attack. I believed then, and I believe now, that the founders had it right. That is to say, that there are times when rights can be attenuated in the interest of national defense.
And Rashish, you have kind of a unique experience, a unique American story, in that you were not raised in this country, you were raised in India. How did 9/11 strike you? You were here at the time, weren't you?
Yes, I was here, and I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, and the details around that incident. And my first reaction was, how dare they? You know, we are the United States of America, and how dare anybody just attack us simply for being what we are, which is a successful, prosperous nation. Because ultimately, I think that's what it boils down to. You know, some people resent us for what we are. Mm-hmm. And yes, I was upset like most people when this happened.
Now, did 9/11 actually have an economic impact on the country long term? Certainly short term, we know that it did, but long term, what's the...
An economic cost, without question. There are both direct costs and what economists call opportunity costs. Mm-hmm. The direct cost, let me stipulate first of all, that the largest cost in a moral and other sense was the loss of lives. And the contributions those people might have made, not only to their families, but to the economy, lost forever. And that was a tragedy in and of itself. But the other costs that flow from all of this have ultimately to do with resource costs. And by that I mean there are things that we do now to defend ourselves that involve the use of resources that could be used in other ways. And those are pretty profound costs, and they're going to continue.
I think all of us can relate to the costs of the security as you go through the airport and that kind of thing. But are there other things that have been impacted specifically by the security measures that we've taken as a result of 9/11?
All you have to do is look at the U.S. ports and look at the level of activity through those ports. We depend as a nation on those imports. We export a lot. We used to be the largest exporter in the world, not anymore. But we are the largest importer. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that we restrain the rate at which those imports can arrive and impose the costs of policing those imports, that's a huge cost. And then we have plant floor implications too. And these costs implicate a lot of things, not the least of which is an essentially open border, which continues to cause a problem for us.
So, Rashish, what do you think?
Dr. Roth is right about the ports, something that I'm really not familiar with, but just the airports, with which I'm a little more familiar with, simply because from time to time I travel in and out of El Paso, and you can see the inconvenience that is caused to many, many people that are traveling, not just at El Paso, but throughout. One little incident somewhere, and now all of a sudden people have to go through these elaborate security measures. So there is that other part of the opportunity cost, which we as a country and as an economy will now continue to pay for it, because this is simply an ongoing event.
Do you think that there's any relationship between the economic impact and our freedom as individuals? Is the economy is affected by this? Is our freedom also affected as people?
Well, yes, without question. But may I add one thing that I intended to say a moment ago, but frankly forgot. There's another huge cost that we absorb, and that is the cost of national defense, which has increased massively since 9/11. We all know about our troops deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and whatever else one says about that, the thing that animated all of that was 9/11. And we now spend about 16% of our federal budget on national defense.
Compared to what it used to be?
Going back to my favorite illustration, going back to President Kennedy, 1961, it was 49% of our budget. And it has gone down systematically since then, and I have a separate speech about that. But the point is, it's still 16%, and we should not lose sight of the fact that one of the reasons we still have to spend as much as we do spend is not only because of the defense of the homeland and the projection of power. We spend a great deal of money defending other people who also are threatened by radical Islamic terrorists. There's no other way to say it. And so, for example, I talk about this in other contexts. On average, the other nations that belong to NATO spend perhaps 1% of their GDP and less on national defense. We, on the other hand, spend about 3%. And our GDP is a whole lot larger than theirs taken together. And the point is, this is a cost which we willingly absorb in the interest of protecting the West, broadly defined, and the United States. And you didn't ask, but I'll volunteer this. We as a nation cannot continue to absorb those costs, particularly those projected national defense costs, into the future at the rate at which we're doing it, because we're now in a situation where we have an outstanding debt of $15 trillion. That's 12 zeros. We can't afford it anymore. And so we're absorbing all sorts of costs, and they emanate directly or indirectly from 9/11.
And so how does this impact the individual? We talk about trillions of dollars and the national debt, but how does that affect me as a person on a day-to-day basis? Rashish?
Well, I always wanted to be recognized for my looks growing up, but it didn't happen until 9/11 happened. So, but people with fine taste are only at the airport with TSA. They give me special treatment when I fly out.
Right. Special treatment. Gee, I
Yes.
know.
They must have read Dale Carnegie books in their training rather, because they seem to take a genuine interest now in where I'm going and how long will I be gone and who else is traveling with me and how many bags I have checked in, and it's such a nice feeling to know they take such an interest in me.
Yeah. So
No,
how do you can joke about that, but how do you feel about that? Because you are singled out because of your appearance. And so how do you feel
I
about
don't
that?
mind at all. I don't mind at all. I don't blame them. They have a tough job to do. It's difficult in the sense there is absolutely no room for error, and they can't take any chances. So they have to do what they have to do. And really, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. I mean, the biggest cost I've paid is I've been delayed by 2 minutes, which is not a big cost at all.
So you don't take it personally?
Oh, no, not at all, not at all. In fact, I would joke with them, but that's not allowed. So I don't joke with them.
That's right, sure. Yeah.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
The American Civil Liberties Union would have a different view. they start, I think, with the same premise with which I start, and that is that persons are morally equivalent, and therefore there is an equal treatment imperative. I differ from the ACLU, and I'll just say the words, modern liberals. There's a difference between classical liberals and modern liberals in the sense that I don't buy the liberal idea that equal treatment means that, for example, and this is really the key idea that animates their thinking, the state, whether it's local, state, federal, has to be indifferent with respect to how people live and with respect to how you define the good life. And liberals define rights, which is really what we're talking about here, as antecedent to civil society. That is to say, they believe that each of us possesses rights against anybody else's external preferences, that is to say, how we think they ought to live, and they have rights against any state intrusion into their lives. Now that's ridiculous on its face. And I will simply suggest that, first of all, I admire Rajesh. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and talk in the abstract about how the right to equal treatment in the sense that everybody has to be intercepted at the airport. That doesn't happen to me. They generally let me through. So I applaud Rajesh for taking that attitude. But the fact of the matter is that national defense trumps liberals' understanding of rights, period.
Okay. Well, let's see if there is actually a relationship between the issue of economic freedom and quality of life. We're talking about civil liberties here. We're going to watch a clip that lasts about 2 minutes on this whole topic.
Imagine you had to live in a country from one of these two lists for the rest of your life. Which list would you choose? If you're like most people, you would choose A. Let's take a look at why that is. Take Chile and Venezuela. Chile's poverty rate is half that of Venezuela's, and its inflation rate is a fraction of the size. Actually, all of List A appears to be better off than B. Look at income per person. It's 10 times higher on average in List A. But these lists aren't organized by income. They're organized by economic freedom. List A countries have the most free economies in the world. List B, the least free. Across the globe, we see a strong relationship between economic freedom and people's quality of life. For instance, people in the most free countries earn, on average, over 8 times more than people in the least free. The poor earn 10 times more. People in the most free countries are happier. They have better protected civil rights, cleaner environments, and the average person lives 20 years longer. The freest countries also have less corruption, less infant mortality, less child labor, and less unemployment. So if you care about improving people's lives, then you really care about economic freedom. And having economic freedom means your property is protected under an impartial rule of law. You're free to trade with others for what you need and want. Your money keeps its value because your national currency is stable. And government stays small relative to the size of the economy. For years, the U.S. was among the world leaders in economic freedom. But over the last decade, the U.S.'s ranking fell, and it's projected to keep falling. The question is, will our quality of life fall with it? If you like this video and want to join the discussion, visit facebook.com/economicfreedom.
So that the whole issue of economic freedom is one that is very closely tied to our civil liberties. So have in fact our civil liberties declined since 9/11? Experientially, you would say yes, Rajesh. Can you think of other ways that they've also declined since 9/11?
Offhand, I can't think of any. The one that comes to mind is some time ago, and I think it was a year or two ago, I tried to open up a new bank account, which I hadn't done in a while, and they asked me several questions, and I had no problem answering them, but they were a lot more than what they had asked me years ago when I tried to open one up as a student. When I was here on a student visa, they asked me a few questions and there was my account. And now they ask many more questions, undoubtedly changes that have been brought about by events of 9/11. I'm assuming that now they are required to go through this, that, and the other, and whatnot. Right. So, I mean, I had no problem getting my bank account open, but I couldn't help wondering that they are asking many more questions now than they did several years ago. But on a day-to-day basis, no, I'm sure there's a cost to the economy, but I personally haven't felt anything different in my day-to-day life. Okay. As far as being singled out by people, we heard of a few unfortunate incidents that happened in Arizona right after 9/11, but I mean nothing compared to that, or even mildly compared to that. Have I experienced anything here now?
What is the relationship between the decline of the economy and the erosion of civil liberties? Is there one?
Well, let me give you, in as reasonably clear English as I can, an answer to that. What Rajesh was just talking about falls under the rubric of what we economists call transaction costs. Transactions costs involve costs that you enter into before a contract and the costs you absorb afterwards. And this is one-on-one, this is a person with an institution, it's lots of things. And it is absolutely clear that the security enterprise that we've engaged in, to use bad English, since 9/11 has massively increased transactions costs. It costs more to do anything. It costs more, again in plain English, to produce a product now than it did before 9/11. And it's all tied to the attenuation of rights, not just civil rights, but also property rights. I mean, the sheer fact of having to go through a security process to bring stuff in from abroad means that the stuff that is brought in costs more to the producer who uses those inputs. And then that producer is subject to all sorts of inspections, including not only of the facilities, but also of the employees. That increases the cost of producing everything. Now, I don't know of anyone who's estimated those costs, but they have to be huge. There is no question about that.
What about that whole boiling frog syndrome, where if you put the frog in the pot and the water's nice and comfortable, and then you turn the heat up gradually, the frog boils to death without realizing that it's boiled to death? Do you think we're in for that? Is that happening to us as individuals? Are we just getting used to intrusive security procedures, intrusive paperwork? What do you think, Dr. Ruff?
Well, I think there's a sense in which we all get sort of cauterized, acclimated, adjusted to certain things. But I will say this. Americans are a feisty lot. We have been brought up that way. It is our tradition. And so I'm sympathetic to a point with, for example, the American Civil Liberties Union and what it's trying to do. I think the ideas that animate what they're trying to do are wrong. However, they're not going to go away, and the person on the street gets irritated about lots of things. That's not going to go away. People don't like Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security, and that will continue. And so that will always serve to temper the impulse to tighten the screws on civil rights, and that's exactly what the founders intended. But that has to find expression in the Congress. And it is the Congress that gave us, for example, the Patriot Act. And the Congress acted on behalf of the people. And I can assure you, having spent some time in Washington, that if the boiling water gets hot enough, the Congress will hear about it and they will tamp down, and it's already begun to happen. They will tamp down the activities of the Department of Homeland Security. And the tension there is you don't want that tamping down to go too far either.
So How are they tamping down the activities of Homeland Security?
Well, you want to comment on that, or
Why don't you go ahead?
okay? There is constant debate in hearings when the Congress isn't even there, which is good when they're not there. But the point is, they conduct hearings all the time. There are a number of committees with oversight responsibilities with respect to that particular department. I use them because they're sort of the penumbra. They sucked in everything. And they are constantly asking questions of the following sort. Haven't you gone too far? Do you really have to do this? And that forces the leadership of Homeland Security, starting with Donna Shalala, to at least think twice before they institute something. And so we're constantly after them through the Congress. And in all candor, it's really the Congress, it's not the executive. The Congress is the first among equal branches. And it starts there, and that's the way the founders wanted it. And if we feel they've gone too far, meaning Homeland Security, we go to our congressman or our senator, and they'll put the pressure on.
How do you think the founding fathers would have felt about Homeland Security?
Well, actually, I came prepared for that question. And I don't mean to filibuster here.
No. Go right
You're
ahead.
entitled to more than 10 seconds, Rajesh. Thomas Jefferson is on record having said, in my words, not his, that national defense within limits trumps rights. And I brought with me a book which I recommend to your viewers.
Okay.
Not mine. It's
I
not
was going to
mine.
say, you've got so many books.
No,
that
but
you've written.
I'm not, that would not be appropriate, so I'm not touting mine. But this is a book called The Founder's Almanac. I don't know if you want to show that
Okay.
on screen.
All right.
I have no ownership interest in this book.
Okay.
It's important for a lot of reasons, not the least of which it provides quotes from the founders on various topics. And I'll ask you to indulge me for just 1 minute. I know I'm not supposed to drone on. This is Alexander Hamilton. He's not my favorite of the founders, but he is authoritative. Let me find it here, just 1 second. The circumstances that endanger the safety of nations are infinite, and for this reason no constitutional shackles can wisely be imposed on the power to which the care of it, meaning the safety of the nation, is committed. Now, I don't know how to say that more strongly or more clearly. There are times when, in the interest of national defense, rights must be attenuated, not without limit, and always subject to the people's oversight through the Congress.
So what would Ronald Reagan have done? Would he have established the Department of Homeland Security? How might he have handled this situation? Rajesh, you're a fan of Ronald Reagan's.
Yes, I am. And I think he would have done the same thing, except to a much greater extent. Because
Greater extent, that's interesting.
yes, and rightly so. And I agree with that, because President Reagan, in my opinion, it was hard for him to do something wrong. So maybe my opinion will be biased, but he too believed in defending the United States of America no matter what. And it was evident when he dealt with Gaddafi back in the late 80s.
And now, how
the
did he deal with
Mediterranean
Gaddafi
Sea.
in the 80s? Remind us of that compared to what we've just experienced with Libya.
Well, the one incident that I had heard is some of these fighter jets from Libya came too close to the U.S. Battleships, the aircraft carriers, to be precise. And I think aircraft carriers are sacred. The Navy, I'm sure, will agree with me. You don't come too close to them just to be cute. And they did. They even had the gall to fire a shot in some general direction. Nothing happened. But what was interesting is what happened a few minutes later. One of them was belly up in the Mediterranean Sea. So the whole thing was, you know, watch out, guys.
Very decisive,
And
swift
action.
right.
Exactly.
So that's
And
why you would say that he would probably have.
he would have
been-
done, I think, nothing different. And I'm all for what happened, because this was all a result, like Dr. Roth was mentioning earlier, of what happened on 9/11 10 years ago. We just couldn't sit back and do nothing about it. We had to do something. We did. And there is a large cost, unfortunately, both in terms of lives and dollars and so forth. But I mean, that's the unfortunate part of it.
Yeah.
May I add
Sure.
a few words?
Sure.
I stipulate first that I'm not entirely objective about President Reagan. I worked for him.
Right.
But I remember with some precision what Rajesh was talking about. This was a call, a wake-up call that the president took about 3:15 in the morning, and he was told what happened, and he said simply, "Take them out." Now, my point is, that was decisive, and I will add two other quick thoughts as a follow-up to what Rajesh was saying. I think the following about President Reagan had he been confronted with 9/11. Number one, he would have consulted with no supranational entity.
As like the United Nations
Precisely.
or NATO?
He would not have consulted them. He would have regarded that as a threat to our national security. And number two, he would have reacted affirmatively in the sense that he would have recognized that, okay, rights must be attenuated because we do have to recognize the threat and we have to protect ourselves. But the third thing I would say is that I'm not sure he would have reconciled himself to the institutionalization of yet another massive federal agency
Well, he
or
wanted
department.
to eliminate the Department of Education, as I recall. Yeah.
Education, he wasn't a fan of the Department of Commerce, he wasn't a fan of the Department of Labor, on and on and on, and I'm sympathetic to all of that within reason. But the point is, he would have, I'm sure, issued a directive to the various department heads and said simply, come up with a plan that involves the coordination of defense-related activities. Oh, and by the way, State Department, don't waste my time with special pleading about special treatment for particular countries. Don't do that to me. Work with the Department of Defense, work with CIA, work with the National Security Agency, and give me a plan that won't cost additional money, and don't come back and tell me we need another department. That's how I think he would have reacted.
Well, how do you feel about the attenuation of our civil liberties, the lessening of our civil liberties? Would you let us know what you have decided on Facebook, our website, or through Twitter? And we thank you very much for watching, and good evening.